Well, greetings, folks. Now, in this lesson, I'll be talking to you about the differences between West African hoodoo, or they didn't call it hoodoo then, but their religious and magical practice, and how that has come over with the slave ships from West Africa into the US, into the South in the US, and how that has evolved into how we currently understand and practice hoodoo today. And I think this is really important for several reasons. Firstly, there is such a huge, let's say it's an issue within the hoodoo conjure community of who practices traditional hoodoo and who has the right to teach hoodoo, and who does it better and all of that stuff. And also it's important to really explain the differences in the religious hierarchy, why we practice, how we actually contact deity now versus traditionally how one would contact deity. And I think it's important that you understand a little bit of this history, not to try and make you feel bad about the way we practice it now, but just to actually reinforce that religion and magic and the way everything happens in the world is in a constant state of evolution. And what you're doing now is perfectly okay. And hopefully you'll have a better understanding on how you can actually improve your practices and honor deity, or start to honor deity if that's the case. So let's talk about West African, we'll call it hoodoo because that's what we call it now, but West Africa religion / magic. So in West Africa, they don't see religion and magic as separate. Religion and magic is one. There's no difference between the ancestors to the gods to the way we're living life right here on earth right now. We are all connected as one, as we are when we look out at the physical world, of the trees, the rocks, the stones, the water, the land. We're all connected. And so this is why it's very important that people stay connected to the land. They stay in their village. Their roots, their ancestors, their connection was in that place. So could you imagine when those slave ships came in and they actually took someone away from their land? So it's not just taking away from their tribe, which is bad enough, from their children and so forth, but the physical land that their ancestors occupied, that they had that magical religious experience on that land, that is significance. That's your roots. That's your blood. That's everything. Now, as you can hear, I'm Australian, so the Australian Aboriginals, their tribes are exactly the same. Where your land is, your tribe will remain there forever, because that's where the spirits are. That's how the spirits are the good, the spirits are the bad, but more important, your ancestors are there too. And so that connection is extremely important. So set that in your mind as a foundation for what religion and magic and culture meant to the people who were there, okay? Then let's start talking about roles, because it's one thing that you're connected to the land and the micro and macro. It's really important that you understand your place in this system. So you weren't just an individual sitting at home listening to this tape or reading a book or on the internet looking up a few spells to help you get your boyfriend back or to make someone feel better. You actually had a role in your society. So whatever that role was, you honored that role and you played that role, no matter what that was. That's where you fit in. And because of that role, you were limited on what you could and couldn't do. There was a lot of structure in those societies. as modern as what we feel like we are. Perhaps we're too modern these days because there's a lot of loneliness in our culture, but also there's no structure. There's no differentiation between what you can do magically versus what you can do as a human. In West Africa, there was a huge difference. So let's talk about the differences in these roles. So on the individual level, on the micro level, we had a role. And then when we're going into the spiritual plane, we have our ancestors. So our ancestors are people that were once living. Now they're now physically dead, but in our mind, as a member of this village, they're not dead because we're still going to hold them in very high esteem. When they're dead, they can still come to us through our dreams and advise us and help us with our issues in our current life. So we don't hold them as gods, we actually hold them in high esteem. And so we must treat them like if they were living. We honor them. We set up an altar, we give them drink, we give them food, we have discussions with them. And we'll talk about that in another lesson. But we were limited to talking only and giving esteem to our ancestors. We couldn't then go to the next level up, which is the gods. Now, to get to the gods, to actually ask the gods for something, you had to be a high priest or a high priestess of that village. Now, this is a very, very important role and not one that's taken lightly. The high priest or priestess was really groomed from birth. This person had a very formal and very structured role in this community. And only this person could chair the ceremonies. This person held the rites and rituals. Only this person could contact the gods or the goddesses to ask for whatever that community needed. Unlike today, where we feel like we can set up a shrine and ask the gods for whatever we feel like we want to ask them for. And above the gods was the supreme being, the one and only, this huge supreme being. And this supreme being was basically at the top of this pyramid and controlled absolutely everything below. And so there's no way that an individual would go up and ask a supreme being for anything. There's just no way. You'd be killed. It would be so disrespectful. It'd be disrespectful to even ask the gods for anything. But here in today's practices, we feel like we can ask anyone on that pyramid for anything we like. And so that's extremely different. Imagine how different that is to what we do now, to how it is actually practiced. It's really important to get this. So on this macro level of ancestors, gods, supreme beings, the supreme being, this level was, it's not separate from you. You're a part of this whole system. Your whole life, your religion, the magic, the way you are, your community is all intertwined. It's all connected. And every breath you take, every minute of every day is a part of this huge, beautiful system. Extremely different how we practice magic right now. Would you agree? Okay. Now, apart from the individual and then the priest and priestess, then we've got the medicine man. Now, depending which village or which custom, which country in West Africa, the medicine man was a necessary evil to many of these cultures because he had the power to control evil forces, and he was sort of seen as a little bit of a wild card in some of these villages. So when times are really good, you didn't actually want the medicine man around, and sometimes he would have to actually run off so he wouldn't be killed. It was actually bad juju if he was hanging out because times are going really good, and you don't want the medicine man who can, cause destruction to good times. But he was a necessary evil, if you like, when times are challenging. And so he was the one who actually could mix up magic herbs. He was the witch. He performed the witchcraft. He was the one that everyone actually feared. And the levels of the abilities of medicine men varied greatly between, obviously, like it does now, one witch is better than another witch, or one hoodoo practitioners is better than another for various reasons. But that was his specific role, or her specific role was to actually be that witch, to come up with all those concoctions, to actually be that spellcaster, to have that level of connection. And so he was very different from the priest or priestess and to the individual. The individual didn't do any of those things. The individual had his or her specific place in that village. And so it was the same when it come to possession or invoking spirit into you. That wasn't done on an individual level ever. When we're talking about possession, we're talking about a very structured ceremony. We're talking about having a lot of people around that are going to help facilitate that ceremony, and you're going to have the priest or priestess being that master of ceremonies, controlling that spirit and helping that person after the possession finishes, which is really very different to how we do it right now. Most of the time it's done on an individual level, okay? And it's a very different process altogether. All right, so when we're looking at that level of structure, you're probably thinking, okay, so how did Catholicism even get into hoodoo? Where did that come in? Well, that didn't come in till basically it came up from Latin America up into the South, because there were a lot of slaves when the slavery was abolished. A lot of black market slavery was still continuing. And being desperate to get slaves from anywhere, a lot of them were being poached from other countries. And where the Spanish had already introduced Catholicism, the Catholicism way was brought up into the South. And the reason why it was very easily adapted by hoodoo, the hoodoo and voodoo, is because it really mimics that trinity that I was talking about. The one where you've got the supreme being, then you've got the gods, and then you've got the ancestors. And so that layering system, you could easily superimpose onto the Catholics. You could superimpose that onto the more tribal systems, where you've got the supreme being and the gods and the ancestors, and then you've got God and the saints. And then, I'm not great with the Catholic system, but it's that Trinity system once again. Oh, your ancestors, of course. Okay, so now that you have a little bit of understanding about the structure and how we actually practice hoodoo today, I want you to really just understand that if you're getting stuck in your work, it may be because you're not starting out at that first level. So you're probably not starting out with setting up your ancestors' altar, your ancestral altar. And remember, this is so that you're honoring your dead relatives, the people that were important in your life, people that you would turn to and talk to for day-to-day problems. Someone you would actually say, look, I'm having a really bad day, can you give me $20? Or can I give you $20? Or whatever it is, you had someone that you could talk to and enjoy day-to-day life with and lean on. And so these people in your life, you need to set up an altar. You need to honor them as if they were still living. This is really important. Now, your dead ancestors, can't do anything magically for you, and magically as in like they can't go and materialize $100 million for you. But what they can do is help you manifest what you need, and they can be an intermediary between the gods and them, so they can put out requests to the gods, if you want to think of them like that as well, because they're on the next plane up. Also, when you're honoring the gods, think about that distinction of where you need to be magically and to get to the next level up in the macro level of honoring gods. So you may have seen some of my videos. I talk about divination and how you can't just grab a pendulum and swing it around and say, okay, now I've got answers. It's really about connecting up to that spiritual plane. So that takes a lot of work in itself. So if you're not really great at visualization and meditation, at least, you're really going to struggle with having that real spiritual practice and success when it comes to witchcraft and magic type of work. I wrote a book, Spiritual Warfare, but what that was really about is just a daily practice of sitting down and thinking about your connection, okay, to basically just disconnect, and then being able to focus on something, and then being able to visualize on something. So you don't have to go and read that book, but what it really is a daily practice of just focusing and visualizing so you can get to that your higher self. You can begin your ascension, if you like. So if you're really, because sometimes most of the time I'm leaning on the left-hand side of the path. So for you, maybe you want to sit in front of your shrine or altar, or in front of your ancestral altar, and for 5 minutes, just really think positive thoughts about your ancestors. Think about a time you shared with them. Visualize it till it's a memory in front of your face and you can see it super clearly. And just hold on to that memory and try not to let other thoughts come into your head. Just focus on that thought and let out lots of thoughts of appreciation and gratitude. And then after a period of time, you can release that. So if you can't do anything else, that is a really good way, once again, to connect to the higher levels. Oops, excuse that fire engine behind me. I'm in Hawaii right now. That's Hawaii 5-0. Okay, so get into that habit of setting up your ancestral shrine and honoring your ancestors. And then if you've got any questions about how do I reach the gods or how do I honor the gods, then ask me about that in the group or in the forum and the comments below, because it really, it's not difficult, but you do need to be able to focus and connect like what the tribal people did in West Africa. Okay, so how they would, apart from as an individual, you wouldn't talk to the gods, remember, because that was the job of the priest or the priestess. What you would be doing is really chanting. You'd be getting into state. There'd be tribal dances or tribal movements or beating of the drum to really build up that energy and getting into state. And so that's what you really need to do to separate yourself from the mundane level where you are right now into the magical. So that's very, very important. Now, you're probably wondering, all right, well, what gods and goddesses do I practice now? Do I practice my magical hoodoo with the West African gods and that system, or do I practice with the Catholic system? For right now, if you really just want to start getting into your hoodoo practices as this 52-week course suggests, then this is something as a sideline project that you really need to work on over the course of this year, because you may feel like you have a strong association with one god or goddess, and then all of a sudden you'll realize, well, hold on, I actually get better results working with this god or goddess. And the reasons why you're drawn to another goddess or you're getting a result from another god may not be noticeable right now, but when maybe in next year, maybe in next 5 years, maybe another 10 years, you think, oh, wow, now I can join the dots and understand why I'm here. And this god or goddess, this spirit wanted me on this path, this journey. Not everything is right in your face right at this point in time. But being modern people, we all want everything instantly, don't we? So I don't want to get all distracted on all these different spirits and deities and the Catholic system and the West African system of gods, because like you can find out, there's so many. There's tons and tons and tons. But what's most important is that you pick a few for now. We've got some prayers for now, and you actually don't let all of this knowledge hijack your ongoing week-to-week practices of learning something different in Hoodoo. After this year, or if you've got some extra time, then do this extra work and fill in the gaps. Okay, because this course isn't going to teach you absolutely everything, not in 52 weeks. Remember, the ancestors focused on one specific area, and it was a lifetime journey. So we can't expect to learn everything magically and spiritually within a week or even 52 weeks, okay? So just let's understand what the limitations are of actually study. At the same time, let's not get bogged down, and let's enjoy the process. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson and it's maybe filled in some gaps for you, but I'm going to enjoy your comments anyway. All right, blessed be and enjoy your week.